I'd love to ask you about the extrasensory perception. You've written, like you said, the book Phenomena on the secret history of the U.S. government's investigations into extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. What are some of the more interesting extrasensory abilities that were explored by the government? And maybe just in general, ESP, what is it? What do you know of it?
The book was so interesting to report because I spend so much time dealing with like mechanized systems, machines, war machines.
Hmm.
And yet the military and intelligence were and continue to be incredibly interested in the human mind, in consciousness. And so, if one is called hard science, this, what we're talking about now, is called squishy science, right? And it
Hmm.
was really interesting to delve into that world. It just couldn't be farther from weapons and war, or could it, right? And then I really began thinking, well, before science and technology, sort of the supernatural ruled the world. The Oracle of Delphi in Greece exists for the, before the Common Era rulers to go and beg to learn from the powers that be what was going to happen, right? So all ESP programs, I think, pull from that origin story, right? The leader's desire to know. Um, and so I really found it amazing that many people think these systems, or rather these programs, started in the 70s. I learned they actually began right after World War II. And that was because, and here, in my reporting, I find all things sort of always circle back to the Third Reich, to the Nazis. The Nazis had a massive occult program, an ESP program, psychokinesis program, astrology. Both Hitler and Himmler were deeply interested in these occult concepts. And after I learned from records at the National Archives that after the war, um, you know, half of everything went to the Soviet Union, and I'm talking about the trove of Nazi documents from which the superpowers were then going to learn to fight future wars, and half of them went to the United States. And so we got this uh, trove of documents about all of this, and the Soviets got the other. And so it set off a kind of psychic arms race, which in a weird way paralleled the nuclear arms race, which we've been talking about, in as much that it led one side to constantly wonder what the other side had.
Hmm. Have they been able to find anything interesting in this squishy science analysis of trying to see how the human mind could be used as a weapon?
The CIA most definitely believed, from my reading of the documents, that there was something very legit, shall we say, about ESP. It was uncontrollable, it was unreliable, but nonetheless it existed. And being the intelligence agency that they are, they cared less about why it worked. They just wanted to know how they could use it. And then it got into all kinds of elements of placebo effect and this,
Mm.
and when the military stepped in and got involved in the programs, that was a complete disaster, in my opinion, because the military needs to control everything in a mechanized, systematic way. And so they started, for example, teaching people to be psychic, which is a really, really, really bad idea. I mean, um, and flash forward to where we are today, these programs still exist. There's a Navy program which is working on, based on a lot of data that came back from the War on Terror, with certain soldiers knowing, wait, don't walk down that path. There is an IED there.
Mhm.
And they call this the Spidey sense. And they actually have a program that works from this. So these things never go away. They kind of circle around in terms of, being made fun of and then taken seriously, and a little of this and of that. Um, my biggest takeaway from writing that book was a quote that I referenced in the beginning, which is the Thomas theorem, and it says, "If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences."
Yeah. I mean, placebo as you've mentioned, is a fascinating concept. By the way, a short plug. I started listening to it. Andrew Huberman just released a podcast on placebo, the placebo effect.
Does he know the origin story of placebo? We'll have to ask him.
We'll have to ask
Are
him.
you
Yeah.
ready for this?
Yes.
CIA. Okay. And not only that, I can tell you that Dr. Henry Beecher,
Mm-hmm.
Harvard, I think he was also at MIT for a bit. He came up with that term, and you might even say for the CIA.
Does that trouble you that so much of this is coming from the CIA first?
You mean the placebo concept or
The placebo concept, but a lot of the sort of scientific investigations?
Listen, I have such mixed feelings about the CIA, as one should. I think you should have mixed feelings about anything that you cover as a reporter or as a human, because, and maybe change that from mixed to, conflicting, right? Because there are really positive elements of every organization within the federal government. I mean, my first learning about the CIA came from the work I did on the Area 51 book about their aerial reconnaissance programs, which were set up, again, to prevent World War III, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nuclear World War III. It was this idea that information was king. The U-2 spy plane was developed out at Area 51. And I interviewed Hervey Stockman, the first man to fly over the Soviet Union in a U-2, gathered all this intelligence, prevented wars. Later, I wrote a book about the CIA's paramilitary,
Mm-hmm.
surprise, kill, vanish. So just when I was thinking, wow, the CIA is doing all this amazing, non-kinetic activity with aerial reconnaissance, then you learn about their kill programs, and that's a whole different set of issues.
It turns out, as you write in that book, that the CIA assassinates people sometimes, and we'll talk about it. But anyway, like you said, conflicting feelings.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I work with sources to report my books. And so put yourself in my shoes, right? I interview for dozens or hundreds of hours, my primary sources. In the case of the Surprise Kill Vanish book, I traveled with Billy Waugh, the longest serving CIA operator, back to the scene of the crime, back to the battle. We went to Hanoi, we went to Havana. And you really get to know someone. And that's when I say conflicting. I work with sources on a real trust basis, right? And sometimes people will tell me things. They'll say, Annie, this is off the record. This is for you to know about me on deep background, because I want you to know who I am. And that's powerful. And a lot of times it's personal, right? It's personal. It's about their personal life. And they don't want that. And it isn't apropos to what I'm writing about, but I need to know that. And that's where it gets conflicted, because in a good way, because you realize where we're all such creatures of our personal lives, right? So you have a professional life where your national security are in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that is like.